Good evening. This is The Spotlight, the show that looks at local government and white collar crimes the way that most people don't have time to. I'm Kay. I've sat on both sides of the table and I know how messy the system can be. Here we talk about the meetings you didn't attend, the budgets you never saw, and the stories that didn't make the official minutes. Around here, we talk about the stuff that affects real life, city halls, school boards, public dollars, and decisions that shape our neighborhoods. This is the place where policies meet people and where public decisions affect private lives, and where we slow down the noise to talk about what actually matters in towns and communities. If it affects your town, your taxes, your kids, we're talking about it. I'm just a middle aged woman with a passion for local government, accountability, and truth. I have worked in local government as a former city manager who likes to dig, and I feel I can add to the discussions that affect your families. Let me introduce Jeff Myers. We connected after I conducted a public records request from the state of Oregon on the Preschool Promise program, and his name was in those public records. And I figured, why reinvent the wheel? And so I did some Googling, found Jeff. So, welcome, Jeff. Could you please just give us a little bit of your background and tell us what led you to digging through the Preschool Promise program financials?
Yeah, well, thank you, Kay, for having me here, and for all those out there listening. It's hopefully we'll make this interesting because it was to me when I found out about it. But I guess a bit about me. So I'm a dad of two kids in public schools here. Been in Oregon since 1983. Went through the public schools myself here. Yeah, and it was about so my day job doesn't involve chasing fraud and crime in our education system. That seems to be a side project or a passion project. But by day, I do a lot of I do operations work, spreadsheets, analysis. So I just sort of, I guess, found my niche here in the government accountability world. Um, yeah, and I guess I started this about 5 years ago, looking into what was going on in our schools because I had kids in schools and just trying to understand what's happening there, and then quickly kind of grew into, I guess you could call it a watchdog, starting to look up records and make sure that money was being spent the right way, that decisions were made in a good way. Ran for school board a couple of years ago. Didn't win, but learned a lot in the process for sure. Um, and then, yeah, so now I have Save Oregon Schools, which is it's just me, myself, and I, and it's an LLC I established just to operate under. So I publish information on education, access to data, like looking at graduation rates and assessment results and public school spending. And I just try to put out kind of like the same focus that you have for the spotlight, right? Is to help lower the bar for everyone to get access to information about what's important to them. And so I happen to be very education focused, and spending and money and funding is always a big hot topic. So that was one area where I've been trying to help, of just where are our dollars going and what are schools doing with it. That seems to be always an interesting topic.
Were you finding barriers to public information?
Yeah, in some ways, Oregon's pretty liberal with its data. Like they have something called the Oregon Open Data, or I always forget the exact name of it, but they publish a lot of information. Like you can look up every agency, every expenditure that they've made since 2019. I even asked them if they could go further back, and they produced an older data set. So there's a lot of information beyond that that's public. But when you want to dig into something like a preschool program and who's getting the money, where is it being spent, and often you won't find a lot of these details publicly. And frankly, the agencies have made it very difficult to get, and often want to charge you for it, which they can. Our public records law is not one that says everything's free, but you have to learn to be very specific and sometimes being willing to pay.
And the state of Oregon does publish prior records requests online. And I didn't know that. Being a certified recorder myself with public records, I thought that that was great. I'd seen other states do it. So, for anyone that doesn't know, Oregon does publish, and your state may also publish prior records request on there, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Also, you might try and find out if there's already published data somewhere to go look. So once they gave me the link, that's where I saw all of the records that you had requested.
Yeah, and I will add that that is a very unique thing, that is a nice thing that the governor's office does and the Secretary of State does, where they will publish, they have their public records log, so you can see
Mhm.
who's requested what and what was the result. So if there was, resulting files, emails, spreadsheets, that's out there for anyone to download once they provided it. I, I imagine there's probably other agencies that do that, but the lion's share do not. That, like,
Mm.
definitely at the local level, county level, I don't know that I found one, or a school district, anyone that publishes what's been requested, especially like the early learning and care, the DELC, which is the agency we'll be talking about, Department of Education. None of them post their public records, and in fact, they're the ones who are the worst at making it difficult to get data.
Even for myself, I knew the process, and I had a very difficult time getting public records from the Oregon Trail School District. Most cities right up front, they will give you some direction. Here's where you can get public records, very easy. Or they publish the form online and you can just fill it out, turn it in. I really had to go through a lot of digging to go find where to even put that request in. So I just implore people that if they're looking for something, for a records request form or something, in the public service is supposed to help you, whichever school board, school or pool district, library, whatever it is, they are supposed to help you. So lean on them to ask for the form, and if there's any fees, and always ask for a waiver.
Yeah, no, I agreed. I'd say with school districts, my general rule has been if they don't publish, they should. The public records law requires that they publish how to get public records, but it can very easily be buried in their different policy documents. But usually, if you email, like if they have a communications department or even the superintendent's office at a school district, if you just email them your request and say, hey, I'm just trying to find this, could you, if you're not the right
Mm-hmm.
place, could you please route this to the right place or right person? And I tell you, every time I've done that, if they've helped. They don't necessarily provide the records. I wouldn't say that everyone's made that part
Yeah.
easy, but at least getting the request to the right place. If you're nice about it, you can ask, like you said, and most people are willing to help.
Yeah, and especially if you click you're willing to get the information by email, generally it's free if it doesn't take a lot of effort. So let's talk about what are some of these records that you requested and what were you finding? Because when you and I did the pre-interview, the already published information was redacted for me, and you had to really dig around and put some information together in order to come up with the whole picture.
Yeah, so if we wind back the clock a bit, so it was in early 2022 where I'd gotten a tip that said essentially that there was some fraud and waste occurring in then, so sorry, I'll use acronyms here. I'll try, in case people join in partway through, I'll try to re-explain, but we have the Early Learning Division of the Oregon Department of Education. So what is now the Department of Early Learning and Care, a couple of years ago, they were just a division within the Oregon Department of Ed. So ELD is what they were, now they're DELC. But I was told by this, it was just an anonymous email at first of just, hey, there's this fraud waste in these couple different programs, and I ended up connecting, getting more information from that person, and getting direction as far as what records to request. And they were absolutely right. And you'd think, I guess now it's easier to accept that there's preschool or childcare programs that are that are abusing public money, is what we've heard in Minnesota and all the billions in fraud. And it's funny, when those news stories started coming out, it was like waving, going, hey, I've been,
You've been
I've
doing
been,
it for a long time.
I've been saying that since 2022. But it's great. that's getting covered now and getting national attention because it's bringing this topic back up. And but if I again go back to that 2022, started pulling records on this, they call it Preschool Promise is the state program, and that's different, just for those listening, that's different than Preschool for All, which is Multnomah County's free preschool. So they have a universal preschool program in Multnomah County that's also been in the news because it collects way too much money from taxes and they can't even spend enough. That's a whole separate topic. But Preschool Promise was the state program that's intended for lower income families to have free preschool for their kids age 3 to 5. And so I did a records request to get who are all the providers who had signed up to provide Preschool Promise, and then how many kids were enrolled, how much money did they get paid. And yeah, that's when I started to find like the discrepancies that I was told that were there, and that would ended up coming out in a Secretary of State report that we were talking about, that we can talk about more here. The report that came out last July that highlighted some of the fraud and abuse that had been going on. It wasn't a full audit, it was a management letter with a few notes about the issues.
Can you tell me about that? Because it is under the audits section. So, what is the difference between the audit and you're saying it's a management letter?
Yeah, it took me a moment too because I thought they had done an audit. I had reported the fraud and waste and abuse back in 2022. They interviewed me and then closed the case after a year, saying that they hadn't planned on doing an audit or an investigation. That's a whole nother story. I had to reopen it and then push them for another year and a half to then do what they did. And then what they did, it was done by the audits division, but it was not a full audit. Like if you go out to the Secretary of State's website and you look at their audits, they have, a schedule of audits they will be doing. They have a list of audits they've done, but this was not a full audit. And that's where, like, I wish they had, but I'm happy that they did something. And the point of this management letter was to say, officially, we've looked at this program and we looked at some of the data. We identified some potential fraud and waste or abuse of the program, and we've highlighted these issues in the process that now Department of Early Learning and Care has for this program. And then they gave that department an opportunity to respond to each one of those like deficiencies or whatever you like to call it, for those areas where they could make improvements. And then so they kind of agreed or disagreed or partially agreed to these recommendations. So it was more of a review of their process to say, hey, we know it's potentially been abused. We want you now to fix this, but they never did the full audit they should have done. And the
How
letter
many
didn't go deep enough.
and how many times do you think you've called the fraud, waste, and abuse, and then, or maybe even coupled with going to the audits division, asking them to look into it?
So you can file online. Like there's two options if you go out to their website. I forget what it, but the Secretary of State's the one that has this fraud, waste, and abuse hotline,
Yep.
and you can call it or you can submit online. And like I said, I had filed the initial complaints in 2022, and then they interviewed me. We had a Zoom. Still remember it. We had this or a Teams meeting with 3 different folks from the audits division, and I went into great detail showing them the files. I ended up sharing all the files with them that I had, the public records that they could have gotten too, but by going through me, then they didn't have to ask the agency, so it gave them a chance to review before alerting that there was an investigation. But then
Mm.
they never did an investigation. But I had poked them multiple times over email once I had met with them saying, hey, what are you doing with this? What are you doing with this? Is there any new update? Do we need to talk again? How can I help? And then that's when I, out of the blue, just one day got this automated message that said your case has been closed. And it was just, wow, great. And then I had to file another complaint, and then I harassed that audits division manager for for many months, and I feel bad about it. I emailed him afterwards, like I felt bad about it, but it was just like, hey, I think he understood that this was a legit issue, and the ball was dropped, and eventually this person got it in their lap, but they did something, just maybe not far enough. But I'd say politically,
Yeah.
they were probably pretty limited in what they could get away with. I mean, I hate to say that, but I imagine politics played a role in them not doing a full audit.
So from the time that you contacted them in 22 before they issued the letter in 25, we did have um, elections. Was that, I don't know if that played into any of it with Shamia Fagan, Tobias Reed, any of those types of things. Do you want to tell us, like, what is the preschool promise program? Why is there fraud? How did you put the pieces together? Kind of just deep dive for us.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So the way the process works, it always starts with the legislature. Is they have to, they'll pass a bill that says, hey, we're going to appropriate, $40 million to the early learning division for preschool promise to expand, in this biennium. And so in the 2020 to 21 school year, or preschool year, however you look at it, that's when the preschool promise program expanded greatly. So if I Sorry, and I'm going off too far. Let me back up. As far as
Sure.
what it is again, so Preschool Promise is again a state-run program where we provide free preschool for those who qualify, right? So it's lower income, which is defined by 200 families who are 200% or below the poverty line, right? So there's some
Right.
figure, and if they're under the 200% mark, then they could qualify for this program. And the state didn't run like preschools. So this wasn't like public schools, and although public schools could sign on to it, this wasn't like the state running it. The state was granting money to public school districts or to private childcare and preschool facilities to run those preschools and provide the service. So I think that the state's just granting the money to somebody else to run, and then there's some reporting requirements that, okay, I'm going to give you this money, but then you actually have to serve children for one thing, and then you're supposed to report back to me, the state, how many kids did you serve, um, and then also what expenses did you have? Because I guess that's come up before as one of the questions is, so does the money get handed right off the bat? Like if I'm little kid preschool company and I sign up to the state and I get awarded 10 slots, which just means 10, if I have a capacity of 10, like I'm licensed to have 10 kids in my preschool and I get awarded 10 slots, it means those 10 seats for those kids in my school are reserved for this state program. So I can't take any other paying customer. My 10 seats in my preschool, if I got them, if I was awarded 10 spots, reserved for preschool promise kids. So that's step one, is you have to fill out a grant request, get awarded. Well, let's just say I'm little kids preschool, I get 10 slots. Then I have to go get 10 kids, right? So I have to sign up, and I work with, there are these hubs that are regionally around the state called early learning hubs. They're also private organizations, nonprofits for the most part, that these preschools are supposed to work with to help get people signed up and bring
Mhm.
kids to their preschool. So this is where yeah,
Recruiting.
exactly. Like
Okay.
it's a good, when it works, it's a good process. It's a good in theory too, where you'd say you have these hubs that exist and they're being paid by the state to help preschools get started and to get families signed up. So families can go to the hubs and then they can help direct them to preschools in their area and get them and do the income validation and get them signed up. So when it's working, it should work well.
And is it like Head Start?
Ah, it is very much like Head Start, except that again, so Head Start is a federal program, but also states can sign up and help. Like we have something called Oregon Pre-Kindergarten or Oregon Pre-K, which is our version of Head Start, and it works in, trying to think the best way to put it. Essentially, it's like we fund additional slots for Head Start that the federal government covers some certain amount of money. We can augment that with additional money to have more
Mm.
slots, and then a Head Start provider could sign up, with the federal government to get some slots, to reserve some positions for their kids. They can go to the state, and Head Start covers birth to 5, but they do split it. Like there is an overlap at the preschool age, and then they have the kind of 0 to 3 age group. So Head Start can cover the whole range of kids before they hit kindergarten, and Head Start has a tighter requirement of 100% of the poverty level or below. So there's overlap, and that has created problems. Like as I dug into the data, yeah, there are issues of preschool promise providers taking kids from Head Start providers and then causing them to be under-enrolled, and so you had competing programs, both run by our state agency.
Was there a deficiency, do you think, maybe you don't know, was there not enough availability through Head Start, or was it because Preschool Promise offered the 200% poverty?
So I don't. This is, I guess, where the real problem is. Like, was there the need? Like,
Yeah.
because I think we've had this under enrollment problem. It didn't look like that we had a problem, at least according to the data that I got from Head Start. I mean, I didn't get to dig into a ton, but from what I saw and the data like I was able to get to, it didn't look like there was an under enrollment problem until Preschool Promise expanded. Then it was creating sort of competition for the same kids across 2 free programs. And then you have Preschool for All in Multnomah County, which is, again, a lot of the population's up there. That's creating a problem and competition for the same or overlapping programs. So I think it's really hard to tell. If you ask a Delk, they would say we're in a childcare desert.
Mm.
But it's hard to say that we're in a childcare desert when you have, childcare facilities and preschools that are empty and getting tons of state money or federal money or both. Like, seems like there was room. I don't know, but
But to
this is
be
why
fair, it
real
was
audit's needed.
right, and to be fair, it was during COVID, and there was a lot of uncertainty with childcare, with work, but if I remember correctly, so explaining the program, if there was a paying like somebody that wasn't 100 or 200% at the poverty level and was like, I need that slot to be able to go to work during COVID, but it was taken up by somebody who was reserving it but not bringing their children, you couldn't take the paying customer and kick the other kid out. Those slots were guaranteed. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah, yeah. So, I'll give you a real life example, and it's one that she's been in the news enough, and I talk about her because she's like the poster child for abusing this and other programs. There's a child care company called Village Child Care Enterprises, and they have, or they had at the time, a child care center that could take 33 kids, and then another, because there's different designations of what childcare is. There's like a certified family that it's usually in a home and has a max of 16 kids, and you could have a childcare center, which could be, massive. It could be, hundreds of kids. But it was the same plot of land. There was 2 homes. One was a child care center, though one was a child care certified family facility. Anyway, I'm getting into too many details. But Village Child Care was run by Leslie Barnes, who at the same time also was running Multnomah County's Preschool for All program. That's why I say, like, there's Preschool for All is kind of like connected loosely, because Leslie Barnes was sort of playing these dual
Oh,
roles of running a child care that was taking state money, but then also ran Multnomah County's Preschool for All. And when this report came out last July, she ended up resigning within a week because she was one of the examples of taking all sorts of money and totally profiting off of these programs while serving nearly no kids. But let's talk about
allegedly.
her. Yeah, well, I think the data is pretty clear, and so I'm pretty confident about. I'm careful about what I say and stick to facts, and I'd say the facts are pretty clear that she was taking money that she didn't, that she shouldn't have. But yeah,
We're just
waiting for
being
the.
trying to be social media respectful, I think.
You bet. So, but let's talk about her center. So
Okay.
she had, again, the 2 facilities. We'll just talk about the 33 kid center. So she had a license capacity of 33 kids, and she had signed up in the 2020-21 school year for Preschool Promise and was awarded 33 slots. So what that means again is that every kid that would have ended up in that facility had to be Preschool Promise. She could not take a paying customer for that childcare center because, like, nope, the state, that's part of the agreement, the state said, I'm going to give you this money, but you have to reserve, and you should be, filling it with 33 kids who qualify for Preschool Promise. So she served in that year, going off memory, yeah, it was 2 children. So she had 2 kids enrolled in her program, but was awarded 33 slots. So then
Wow.
there's 31 empty seats. And she still took and let me just talk about how they get their money. So she was, for those 33 children, the state had committed in this award to her that you will get $464,000. That's the award amount. Now, what a provider has to do is submit, if for people who, maybe have travel expenses at their work, they might have to submit expense reports. That might be the best analogy, is essentially Leslie Barnes and her company would have to report back to the early learning division and say, these are my expenses every quarter. It was a quarter, and then later on they had to provide it monthly, but they would submit every quarter, here are my expenses for payroll, for mortgage, insurance. There were all these categories. They'd fill in all the numbers, and they would submit those expenses to the early learning division, and then they would be paid based on that, right? And
A
so, and they paid,
reimbursement.
yeah, it's like, they're submitting these requests to be paid their grant money. So they had to, incur the expenses first, then they could submit the report and then get paid. And
There's something, if I can just stop you, that I don't think I asked before. Was there ever a end point? So you, through the life of the grant, you will only ever be able to draw down X amount of dollars. You will only be covered for the first year or two. Was there any sort of um, reapplying, or did you know, was there like something that they could look at and go, well, if I don't get so many kids, I'm out. I only can draw down another, $3,000, and then I have to figure it out, or
yeah, so they were doing annual agreements, and that agreement would be, for this year, you're awarded 33 slots, 464,000 is the max award amount.
okay.
And some places didn't take down all the money that they were awarded because they only submitted a smaller number of expenses. So it wasn't like guaranteed money. They weren't paid the money up
Okay.
front. It was, you had to submit your expenses to then get paid. But then, as I saw through the data, a lot of these providers were submitting expenses up into their full award amount and taking all the money. And some of them had, like, there's another example of another Portland-based facility called the Finch Academy that just started that first year, 2020-21. They had 36 slots, and they had 0 kids enrolled. And they could have, like, their full award amount, I'm looking at the spreadsheet, was 539,500, and they were paid just under 279,000. That's an example of somebody, I mean, for one, I don't think she should have gotten the 279,000 because she served 0 kids, but she didn't submit expenses to get the full amount. She did the following year, but not that first year.
Would you, before you dig into some of that other stuff, would you consider that something like what we saw during COVID, where um, businesses, especially in food, got money to stay open so that they could not lose their business? Is that kind of, even though they weren't serving kids, wasn't part of it to kind of help not lose maybe commercial spaces or rent agreements or things like that? I'm just trying to play devil's advocate that maybe it
Mhm.
wasn't all intended to be what it turned out to be.
Yeah, so part of the rationale, so when this first, I guess you could say, went public, right? I ended up doing a story with Fox News, which I know that might
Oh.
put some people off, but I'm sorry, like, I don't want to make, it's like, fraud to me shouldn't be political, but I'm sorry, like, trust me, I tried all these local, the local paper, like the Oregonian, hit the local news stations. No one would touch the story with a 10-foot pole. No interest
Wow.
whatsoever. I wouldn't even get callbacks. There was somebody in KATU in Salem who did eventually cover it, but it's like the only local person that would even come close for years. So Fox News was willing. That took chasing still to get them to a story, but as soon as it came out the next day, it happened to be Alyssa Chatterjee, the director of Early Learning Division, had to get in front of the legislators to do a meeting, and that's when we started hearing some of the lying and some of the cover up of where she said, oh, well, we gave out the money, even though kids weren't enrolled in some facilities, we were giving out the money to help stabilize the industry, much like
Mm,
other federal and state programs were doing. So we were mirroring those programs,
mm,
which is a really good story, and it fits in line. Like, I'm not trying to put a bunch of childcare facilities out of business, and COVID
right.
was horrible. I mean, it was horrible for a lot of industries and a lot of people, and I get that. But I did a follow-on records request because I know how to dig. I know what to request, and I simply asked for any written communication where they would have sent to a facility or to any of the hubs to notify people that they essentially were getting this money for that purpose, right? You would think
Mm,
if we were opening the door and saying, hey, you're a child care center, and we know you're not serving kids because families are home, they don't want to send their kids, we don't want you to be out of business, so you can request more of the grant money than you're really incurring expenses for to keep open. You would think we'd have to tell them that, but there was no communication. The record came back nothing. Right? So I'm just sitting here thinking, how would somebody know that they could request all the money even though they serve no kids? They didn't. And that explains why some facilities didn't take all the money. They took a very small amount of money, but then you see others like Village Childcare that took all the preschool promise money they were awarded. They took there was a separate federal, it was called the COVID-19 Child Care Stabilization Grant. So this was something that was part of the American Rescue Plan Act in 2021. It set aside, this isn't PPP money, they set aside a whole nother 17 billion for the whole nation. Our cut in Oregon was 248 million, but they set that aside just to stabilize the childcare industry. So then that money was given to the Oregon Department of Education's Early Learning Division to distribute. That was late 2021, early 2022, where they gave out this money. So it was later in the COVID-19 pandemic, but they gave out this
okay.
money to stabilize the industry. And going back to Village Childcare, they took all the preschool promise money for 2020, 21, 22. They got a PPP loan in 2020, another PPP loan in 2021. They got both of those, so they applied to get those forgiven. So that's what you had to do, is you had to go back and say, I used this money for payroll and to stabilize my business, and I'm also saying that I didn't get that money from some other source. So they had to say that to get those loans forgiven. And they got another 135,000 in the stabilization grant. So I'm just saying there is no possible way that they received all that money and still could have gotten those loans and then had them forgiven, and the stabilization grant, and another 10,000 from something called the economic injury disaster loan. There's a small grant ahead of that. That wasn't the anyway. It's a long story, but all that money for serving 2 kids in 2020, 21, 4 in 2021, 22, it doesn't add up. There's no way that you could take all that money and it should have, like, the loan should have been forgiven. So I think, yeah, that is probably one of the worst cases of abuse of all these different overlapping programs for the same need. And it goes to show that there was just simply no oversight at the state level to look across grant programs, to look at the enrollment and to address the under enrollment. I mean, that's been baked into the grant programs. That's something you said earlier. Like, what do we do at the end of a year? Can we, if somebody wasn't able to fill the slots, can we reduce the number? Well, we already had grant language in their grant agreements back in 2020 where if somebody was under enrolled, well, we were supposed to do reviews, and then if they're under enrolled, maybe peel it back. The
Yep.
first step would be, let's help them get enrolled, more kids. Like, what can we do to help get more kids enrolled? But that just wasn't happening, and there was no oversight, and that continued beyond 2022 into the next school year. It didn't improve. It might be improved now, but it's really hard to tell because getting all this data is never easy or quick, and frankly, through like one of the worst terms I hear is self-attestation. If you're familiar with that, I'm sure, but if others aren't, it's basically we're relying on people self-reporting data. So what I think providers learned is just start telling them that you have more enrollment. I can't say
Wow.
that that's exactly happening, but when you have self-attestation, you're just relying on people to tell you, well, how many kids did you have? 20. Like,
But then
uh,
didn't you say also that there was two different types? There was an in-person check-in, and then there was also one that they would report online, and you could go into this portal and see what they were reporting in the portal. You talk about that.
yeah, so that I guess that's the only real point of potential oversight in terms of how many kids is somebody serving that isn't them self-reporting. So you have when you're a licensed childcare facility, you by getting that, you're signing up also that, or you're allowing the Department of Early Learning and Care to come in to your facility twice a year, one announced, one unannounced, to check in to make sure you're following the rules. I mean, it's a good process where we say, look, if you're going to be serving children, especially little kids, we want to make sure that medicine's put away behind in a locked cabinet, and that you don't have just knives around for kids to pick
Right.
up. Because a lot of people are doing running childcare facilities out of their own home, right? So they'll get these visits to come in, and as part of those visits that are done by these employees of the state agency, they will mark in there, how many kids they saw, how many adults, how many were teachers or aides, and they'll check on their, training. Does the teachers, do they have the right credentials and training, and they've done CPR, all that stuff. So that they do all these really detailed checks, and they do a head count, and that data is available, but you have to go out to their website and search for the provider. You can download, those little check-in forms, and you can scroll to the right page, and you can see, how many kids do they count? They had 2 rooms. This one room had 5 preschoolers. This one had 2 infants. And then you can compare that against some of the reports that the providers sent back. And that's why I'll use Village Child Care, because it seems like every
Mm.
possible rule that could be broken, they broke. One interesting data point was for the year that they reported 2 kids in the facility that, again, should have been reserved all 33 slots for preschool promise. They reported enrollment of 2, but when the visit occurred, they found 7 kids. You're like, well, wait a minute. How could they have, if they only reported 2 enrolled? It could be that maybe a few more enrolled and then left. Could be. But it could also be, and I don't think it's a big stretch to say, she was taking paying customers in when all those slots were supposed to be reserved for preschool promise. And she could have uh, she could have gone and said, hey, I don't need this many slots, and said basically return those back to the state and say, I only need 5. So I'm not going to take all the money now. I want to revise my agreement, and then I can take paying customers. But no, didn't appear that that was the case.
Hmm.
So these are the things that why I think, for one, real audit need to occur, because people shouldn't be relying on this guy, with bad access to data, having to go through public records to piece stuff together. The audits division had all of the data and could have connected all of the dots. And then, frankly, Delk should be doing this on their own, because they have all of these different programs that they provide. You got Baby Promise, Preschool Promise, Oregon Pre-K. Um, they and they're the ones who do these audits, or do the drop-in visits and do the head count. Well, if you have all that data, you have everything you need to check everything. It's really that simple, but it's a choice not to do it.
Were you saying there was something with the grant management system? Like, is it a software problem that we're not able to track the grants individually and then cross match those? Or because I was seeing something in the news, or maybe some digging about the states that are using grant management software.
Well, it could be a limitation of the application they're using, but the way I answered this is if I was able to piece it together through a mix of public records and
Yeah.
piecing together information that I could find publicly and then do it in Excel, all right, in a spreadsheet, they can do it. And because they have much better access to data. I mean, they were paying consultants upwards of $500 an hour to help them prep for leaving the Oregon Department of Education and to spin out and become their own agency. So they were paying all these consultants to then build the infrastructure to be their own agency back in 2023. These were known problems that they had these different systems. And I mean, they've had every opportunity to solve this problem. And me as a data guy, like I'm just screaming, thinking like, how could you let this go on to this point? It's It's only way to explain it is it's a choice. They're choosing not to solve this problem because they don't want to hold people accountable. They want to pump the money out there and keep bumping up the program. Like they keep asking for more and more funding to keep funneling more and more money out there, but to what end?
So do you think it's a corruption problem, or is it just a political come, we have childcare, you can do free, we have the free needle exchange, you can do drugs, you can get all of the benefits and all the social programs here, and look at, we have all of these great programs to get you plugged in. And is it a social problem, or what do you think is the source of it, or are we just too big for our own britches?
Well, I remember back to from what I had heard from somebody, who knows more about the inner workings of this stuff was saying that, I didn't realize this. Preschools weren't on my radar at all. My kids are in K-12. They were older. I will disclose my wife is a preschool teacher now, but she wasn't when all this came out. So it wasn't like I had some axe to grind, like, my wife's dealing with this. No, it had nothing to do with that. I think Kate Brown, it was like a signature thing. This preschool promise and the growth of the program was really important to her. And in that first 2020-21 school year, there was a transition of who was running that early learning division. I forget who was the person before Alyssa Chatterjee, but that person left. And then Kate Brown put Alyssa Chatterjee, who was one of her former education policy advisors, put her in as the interim director. And I think in some ways, I think she was young and didn't know what she was doing, Chatterjee, that is. And I still don't think she knows what she's doing. Or maybe she does, and that's what's worse, is she knows that she's running it poorly. But I think it was political, like they wanted to grow it. It was like something to say that look what we've done. We've created
Mm,
this free preschool program and we're helping all these children. And it prevented them from the reality of it's not going well. COVID really threw a wrench in the works. But then once the pandemic stopped, it still, I mean, the problems existed. It's just that you have people who are maybe ideologically aligned at that level, like this is what we want, and we want to make culturally aware preschools, and we want to put all these controls in place, but they're not thinking about the basics of, well, what does it take to run a program? What do we need to have in terms of people, process, and technology for this to go well? Like, this isn't just, I guess you could argue it's just in government inefficiency. The old story of,
yeah.
hey, this could have been done better if it were privatized. I I I don't think it's just inefficient government. I think it's um, inept leadership picked because they were aligned up here and didn't necessarily have the skills. And frankly, some of the money going to certain nonprofits, I think there is that would be a whole nother topic for a whole nother day, but just this web of nonprofits that lobby so heavily,
Yeah.
in the state, at the county level, but definitely at the state level, for a lot of these programs are also benefiting from these programs, or partner or sister organizations of theirs are benefiting from these programs. And I think that's harder to dig into, but I have those receipts as well to show like these places and how they're like the money comes into there and then it gets funneled elsewhere. And so it's sadly, I think a lot of our public money is going out to NGOs, and then it's a big question mark as far as where that's heading, what that's
Yeah.
doing.
I just happen to have been checking out campaign dollars in Cotex's last run, and there's a lot of Act Blue. I think just quickly somewhere around $1.3 million to Act Blue. And uh, anyways, that's interesting. So you can kind of see who's aligning with who, and then that's where I get frustrated. Right? You can see who's donating, whether it be the tribes or some other, big corporate interest, or even people from outside of the area. But you can see where people have been getting the things that they donated for. There's been some legislation, and by all rights, they should have, but the tribes have gotten paths now to become more sovereign than they actually are. They still have to abide by a lot of state laws. So that they shouldn't have to lobby that. And I am, after seeing some of these things, I am just a big proponent for um, we should just quit doing campaign finance. You know what? If you can't deliver on what you say, then show it at the ballot box. So I think campaign dollars are gross, and we all need infrastructure. And the little people are the ones that end up paying the price. We shouldn't have to donate in order to get our streets and our water and all of these things. And even, I'm just kind of getting on my soapbox a little bit, but there's this prosperity council now, and it is. Are you aware of it?
Yeah,
Okay.
go
And
ahead.
so you look at who's who in the zoo, and I'm like, why aren't we bringing in like actually people that have already had success in economic development, in community development? Why are we not just hiring or contracting out for a service? Because I'm sorry, Cho Wines has 5 years experience. I mean, from ground up. I don't know what they're supposed to add to this prosperity council when the whole point is to grow businesses, while every day we're hearing of another closure. I just watched a really good tidbit on Dutch Bros and how she went to the governor and tried to keep her from forcing to be moved to Arizona. And we're just day after day, a farm a day, a business a day, a couple businesses a day. And yet we're got this prosperity council. Look at what we're doing. And it just feels like that. Look at this preschool promise program that we
Mhm.
have. Look at, all of the great things that we're doing. And it's because I think that we've just been so asleep at the wheel that we've just trusted that our government was working for us, and they're not. And this is the hard reality that we're all waking up to, is that while we were asleep and while we were dealing with our mimas in the nursing homes trying to figure that out during COVID, we come back up from our little hole and find out that our government's been lying to us and not working for us and accepting fraud and grants and other things. And so thank you for letting me go on the rant, but it just, every day it feels like I'm finding more and more that is just more disgusting. And I think that's sort of the point though, right? Like, for us to come together in a nonpartisan way, in a bipartisan way, that we can come together and actually create the community that we all need and want, rather than it being political. You mentioning Fox News shouldn't be political. I don't care where you get your news, or who says it. And that's just kind of where we're at. And until those kinds of, I think this needs to happen in order for us to get back to accountability and get back to neighbor and neighbor, um, so that we can start working together. And even being conservative, I have a friend that I just went to lunch with that is very Democrat. We don't ever talk about politics. We never have. So I find it's we can do it, and I love her to death. She's absolutely funny and great, and we can do it if we really want to. So
Yeah.
with that, I'll step back and let you take it where you want to go.
No,
Sorry.
that's all right. No, thank you for saying that. And hey, it's your podcast, or your show. You get to go with it wherever you want. But I totally agree. Like, we shouldn't, like, my best friend from like grade school to adulthood and beyond. Like, we are on opposite sides of the spectrum politically in our beliefs, but like, it doesn't. It's okay. We can agree to disagree, and that's fine. Like, that's more where we need to be as a community. Is say, like, I don't like what you think is right, but I think you're an okay person. But fraud, like we should all be looking at that going, fraud is bad.
Absolutely.
Crime is crime. Fraud is fraud. Like that shouldn't be something that's political. But one thing when you were talking about businesses failing, it made me think about, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I had looked at, like, there, I mentioned this web of nonprofits. That makes it sound very conspiratorial, but it's a conspiracy. It's just not a conspiracy theory. Looked at
Okay.
the data, and that there's uh and it's not necessarily all the nonprofits, but there's like a core 20 or so that I had looked at, and then just looked at their growth in revenue from the state, just Oregon, like not even looking at federal sources or others, but if you just look at the growth in revenue, and then like most of them were 4 to 5 to 6x over like 2019 to 2023, just that little period, and then it sustained. It's not like it just, hey, they got some COVID money and it dropped off. No, and it
Mm,
was way more than others. Like these stood out as anomalies compared to others when you're looking at, this nonprofit used to get 2 to 3 million, and then boom, it just shoots up to 15 million, 18 million. And that's like, so the reason I bring that up is we have businesses leaving, but what's growing around here? It's nonprofits. Like these NGOs are
mm,
growing like crazy on our dime, but they're not, it's it it's not necessarily a good thing. I used to think, and I still think, there's a lot of nonprofits that do a lot of good. But then there's a lot of nonprofits taking a ton of money, and I don't think I have a good idea. I don't think most people have an idea of what they're doing with all this money. Um, and that is a whole
I think you're
separate.
really onto something right there. Not that I have any proof of anything, but right in front of me. There was some digging that was done maybe during COVID about how some government money was being fed back to the nonprofits around, things, elections, or I don't know. I think that's one of the unsafe TikTok words, but around that and stuffing things. And so I'm just going to say allegedly. So I think there's some funny business there. You got, bond measures, people that are, if you got issues with stolen, allegedly elections, that is the claim. Then theoretically, so are bond measures. And I just had a guest on last night who, under deposition in New Jersey, he is suing the city of Cranford. And under deposition, it was found that the reason that there was tax incentives for housing crisis and for building apartments and not condos was because a single developer was giving kickbacks to, so they're getting seed money from the government to then get the kickbacks. It's all being.
Yeah.
I think you're really onto something, and again, not all NGOs are like that, but we are taught in government to partner, very, very heavily taught to partner with NGOs because they're part of your community. They're part of what, they do the social programs that you don't have the money for. They can go, pass out the food, they can pass out the needles, they can bring in healthcare, they can bring in mental health, all the things that create community that cities and counties don't particularly have expertise in. So you need your NGOs. And I wouldn't be shocked if there is, one day you turn on the news and we're seeing the same thing with Preschool Promise that we're seeing in Minnesota, that we're seeing everywhere else. So
Yeah.
if you have more information on that or have some, specifics, I would be interested to know about that at, some other point. Not pushing you to do more work, but if you do end up digging or in the
Oh, I have.
NGOs.
We'll talk. We'll talk separately, and then maybe I'll come
Yeah.
back again, because I filed some that group of nonprofits. I'll just tell you, I done a records request. There's a funny story involving the Marion County Circuit Court too about this records request. But I did a records request of the governor's office because there was so Governor Kotek's education policy director. I'm forgetting her exact title, but her name was Pooja Bhatt, and she was hired by the governor to be like for education initiatives director, some role like that. So she was, basically a top advisor for education for the governor, and I she was on my radar for other reasons we don't need to get into right now, but I knew these nonprofits were likely working with her, so I did a very targeted records request. You can go and look; it's on the governor's public records log from back in beginning of 2014, February 2014. Put this request in that I want to get all these emails from, I think it was like 20, basically when Pujamont had started through certain period, like it was like 15-month period, and I want all those emails between her and these nonprofits, and I specified all their domain names and email addresses, and I ended up having to pay $1,200, and that's out of my
Oh my.
pocket. And by the way, I don't monetize anything I do. There's no dark money web
Oh,
funding me. I mean, trust me, my wife and I had to talk about that. We're serious, and I just said, look, this is important that we're going to drop this kind of money because people deserve to know, and I'm very transparent. When I get records, I publish records. Like, there is some coordination going on with the governor's office and these nonprofits and a lot of lobbying, and I'm almost positive, like I was pretty positive that it was going on, and the records eventually I did get after 6 to 8 months of battling with them, got the records that I paid for, and found exactly that. Just immense. I mean, you would 3,500 plus pages of documents of just emails and attachments between these nonprofits and this person, the governor's office, and they were coordinating on, legislation they wanted to push the legislator to do, because it's the governor's office, right? They're not the legislature, but they present a lot of bills that
yeah.
or legislative concepts they want the legislature to run with, and there was just tons of activity going on with this select group, and it was just obscene. And so I took that and other information I had, and I went to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission later and said, because it's kind of a long story, but the lobbyists need to report to the Oregon Government Ethics Commission. They have to report, one, that they're lobbyists, who they lobby for, and what expenses they incur. And organizations that do lobbying also have to report who their lobbyists are and how much they're spending each quarter in lobbying. And it's just a way to be transparent that if you're lobbying, you need to disclose it.
It
Um,
wasn't SEIU, was it?
no, I mean,
Okay.
I'm sure they do a lot of it, but they weren't one of the ones. It was
Okay.
like Kairos PDX, Urban League of Portland, Uval Cree, like IRCO. It's like Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization, Children's Institute. This is all just off the top of my head. Like I could name them because
Oh.
I've seen them in so many places. But I reported to the Ethics Commission after I cross-referenced what they had reported for lobbying expenses, and most of them didn't report any. And then I gave them this evidence of here's all the documents and sent it over to them. The Ethics Commission, again, we could talk on and on about how big of a joke that is. Like, they don't investigate anything. It's sad. Their core mission, as they believe it, is to educate people. So if anyone says like, oh, let's send somebody to the Ethics Commission, we'll get them. Don't get your hopes up
Yeah.
that they're going to actually do an
No.
investigation or that anything good will happen. However, the Urban League, out of all those, they were the ones who they settled before an investigation even started. They settled quickly and said, we will update our lobbyist records. And they admitted to and republished the records of having done quite a fair amount of lobbying. But they had reported zero for multiple years, including the years of these emails. Like, they were just lying. And it's just sad that the reason I bring all that up is you have these nonprofits that are growing at our expense, and they're funneling, I'm sure they're delivering some service to the community, great, but they're also hiring more people to do more lobbying of the
Yeah.
state legislator, of local government too, and then they're getting more programs to provide more funding for them and for their peer organizations, and we're just creating this bigger and bigger and bigger web of nonprofits that deliver these services, but they're not paying into the same kitty. It's like, this isn't sustainable growth, right? You can't, like,
Yeah.
they're creating more jobs in that nonprofit, but it's just not, it doesn't work.
Right.
And I think there's more digging that could be done, definitely could be done, but I have enough, at least on a set of them, to go, there's enough beyond shady stuff going on with them. And I talked to some legislators, and these names have dropped the names, and they're like, "Oh, they're always here asking for money." I'm like, well, that's funny. They report nothing for lobbying. So I think that I'm really hoping some of that comes to light, or there's bigger digging into that over the next couple of years, because it
I'm
is.
I'm just gonna pause there really quick, just in case people have come in late or don't know what's going on. We're talking with Jeff Myers with Save Oregon Schools. He did a lot of digging on the on the preschool promise program with the state of Oregon. It was mostly done in 2021, but a lot of the records are in 22. You made reports to the state of Oregon. You begged them to audit, and it took a lot of money, a lot of energy, and then they produced a management letter, and that management letter was issued by Tobias Reed, who is now Oregon Secretary of State. And at the time, the treasurer over these grants was Tobias Reed. I find that a little bit interesting. So, as we start talking about ethics and how Oregon works, their basically letters of education, you might get a $50 fine. Sometimes you have to hire an attorney to maybe represent you so that you feel like you're represented fairly. But there is very little that is done if you are found in violation, unless it is something really, really bad. So with that, you've dug on this. You say in your report to the state of Oregon when you were reporting fraud, waste, and abuse that it could be tens of millions of dollars, but what they found in the management letter was $3.2 million. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, they were just looking at a subset of providers, so they were using that as an example, and that's where yeah, you can easily lose that or think that, oh, they only found three. I'm not saying that you were. I'm just saying that somebody, and I think some of the reporting that first came out when this hit the news, they were highlighting that figure. Like, no, it wasn't that they found a total of that amount in waste or abuse. It was just in their sample set. They didn't look across the whole program. They just looked across
Oh,
in these providers. So, like, if you want, I could bring up on the screen. It's just to
yeah.
show.
Let's do it.
Yeah, let me remember what I had to do. Here we go. Okay, so
Oh,
this hopefully,
let me pull you up here. Here we go.
hey, there we are. Okay, so this was part of that management letter the Secretary of State put out, and this was their, they scroll up, it says, hey, we found preschool promise issued 679,000 in wasteful payments to 4 providers with chronic low enrollment between 2021 and 2023. And so this is, I think this is what you were looking at when you were asking for more, like who are these providers? Like they didn't put the names in, they just said provider 1, provider 2, 3, and 4.
I was looking at the under the audit and that probably that management letter. I don't even know that I got to that screen. And before I just was like, who were the people in the report that you're talking about? So that's what my records request was for. And they
Yep.
didn't give me that information. When I started Googling you, I found that you had the list of all of the people. And surprisingly, the school districts were a lot of the recipients of the funds. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so this one, it's funny because I can look at these and say 36 slots, 0 kids, 36 slots, 1 kid enrolled. This is the Finch Academy. That's one of the ones I mentioned earlier where they were awarded 539,000, they were paid this much. You'll notice that and this is the management letter, this is on page 6 of what the Secretary of State put out. They didn't question any of the costs in 2020-21 because, this is what's sad, they accepted that lie that Director Chatterjee shared, which is we were giving out this money to help prop up the industry in this time of COVID and all that. It's like but there's no proof that they ever told anyone they could do this. And we just found that some people really seemed to abuse it and some people did not. In anyway,
Hmm.
That's why you don't see the question cost in that first year, is because they just said in their report, we're just assuming that that was correct. So we're now just going to only focus our review on 21-22 and the 22-23 school year. So in any case, you had, like I said, Finch Academy awarded 36 slots, enrolled 0 kids, so 0% enrollment, but she still received 279,000 of the 539,000. And then this second provider is Village Childcare, where again, like I mentioned, 33 slots, 2 kids, awarded 464,000 and was paid the entire 464,000. And what's interesting, if you look at these two, it shows that the number of slots reduced. So Village Childcare went from
Mm.
33 to 20 to 10. There was mention of this. That was not the early learning division reducing the count. It was self-reduced. So Village Childcare asked only for 20 the next year and then 10. So this wasn't like the early learning division was holding them accountable for being under enrolled.
Gotcha.
So I just don't want to give them credit where credit's not due. I guess because this was just people self-selecting out of this, and it could have been because it started to become public that they were taking advantage of this. In any case, so these just, and I forget, this might have been all families welcome. I have to go double check. I have it all written out. The first two I know right off the top of my head, because there's only, just based on the number of slots, the enrollment, the amount paid, and the grant award, it was easy for me to take those numbers and look at my spreadsheets, because I'm working from their public records. So my numbers line up to the dollar with the Secretary of State's report, and they got their
Gotcha.
data directly. So that's part of, I think, what validated that what I was reporting back in 2022 was perfectly valid. And like these were real numbers, because their numbers line up exactly with what I've been sharing for years. So this was validating in a couple of ways, for sure, but it didn't get to the whole picture. I don't know if you wanted to dive into it, but there was like another part of this. Sorry, my screen's going super fast, but part of this was what are they going to do about it? I don't know if you wanted to spend any time on this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good. You can hit the highlights or whatever you think is important for us to know.
Yeah, I guess when he said at the very beginning is they did this management letter in this way to indicate there were some issues and there was money spent that we think is wrong, and then the Secretary of State made recommendations for the Department of Early Learning and Care to go and do to rectify the situation. So I went a little bit too far. Like,
So, so before you tell us that,
yeah,
what authority does a Secretary of State have to tell somebody how to fix a program? Let's say, for example, is there only certain programs that they could give that recommendation to? Like, is it just all administrative, or do we even know? Because it seems like if I run for Secretary of State, and yes, I'm in charge of audits, but if um, it's not like the type of audit that you get for the whole program, or that
yeah,
cities are required to do, or that counties are required to do. This is like a program audit. So
right.
how does he have authority to give the recommendation? Because I know, like, for city auditors, they're specialized in their field and that's all that they do. And therefore, they can give the recommendations how to pass the audit the next year.
Right.
And maybe there's too many questions. I'm sorry, but what authority does he have?
So I'm definitely not the expert in terms of like what is the complete, the charter of the Secretary of State, and what is the scope, like what is the legislature giving them as far as, what control they have. At one level, like these are just recommendations for one. So the authority they
Okay.
have as well, I think they can give a recommendation. They do, if you look at some of their other work, like part of what they do is review not just the movement of money, but they also will look at the process. And so I think that's what they highlighted. And a lot of the recommendations are good. They're saying they're calling out process gaps, technology gaps, and certainly the tied to the funding and the how much they're paying out and to what extent. But they're not. It doesn't look like they have any, like there's no teeth. Like they can't make Delk change. At least maybe they can't in this style with a management letter versus if it were a real audit. I don't know. I mean, but the other thing, and that I've learned is there's a piece in here that was missed. I didn't talk about, but that they referred, the Secretary of State referred to the U.S. Small Business Association, a subset of the providers here that they knew had also taken PPP loans, like I mentioned, Village Childcare. So they referred them to the U.S. Small Business Association, not because they knew there was crime, but just to say, hey, Small Business Association, you may want to look into this because this money came out and was meant, and especially in 2020, 21, was meant to be providing them, money to keep open. And also, if they took a PPP loan and it was forgiven, well, you may want to look at that. So they did make one referral to another
Okay.
investigative body, we'll put it that way. But what they didn't do was refer anyone to the Oregon Attorney General to look at potential crime. Like that's the part that's a huge glaring omission to me. Why didn't you guys? You saw clearly there were people taking money who shouldn't have, and clearly there were people in leadership, although it's not acknowledged here, but clear to me, I guess, that there were people in leadership who were just in cover-up mode. Like, why wasn't there any investigation into any of the potential criminal behavior or official misconduct that was occurring? There's none
And
of
I
that.
think that goes back also to what I was saying. He was in charge of the Treasury at that time, and he would be making the recommendation to investigate himself. I mean, I wouldn't, I mean, I'm not saying that I wouldn't do that, but he might not do that.
Yeah, and I
That's
don't know what role they play in terms like, they oversee the dollars maybe, but I mean, these agencies are given these funds to then work with. That's just where I don't know how all these, functions work and interplay with one another.
right. And so these recommendations, if I remember right, some of them they didn't agree with.
Right. Like there were some basic ones like we were talking about here of documented policy for enhanced monitoring of any sites experiencing low enrollment, including those in rural areas, and conditions that would lead to terminating. And so that's an obvious one. Like, hey, if they're experiencing a low enrollment, you should be documenting it. And
Yeah.
what conditions would then terminate the grants? And then the funny part is they partially agree, and they're coming up with new procedures and implement enhanced monitoring. But from the 2020-21 school year, like back to where I started investigating, they had language in the contract already about under enrollment, and it had the process of what they will do over a period of time to deal with the under enrollment. It might be just first we're going to call it out and we're going to talk with you and what's your get well plan, and then we might essentially inserting themselves more and more into the process to eventually going as far as taking away slots and reducing the grant award. So rolling back the clock, they've had the language in there. They've just not done anything about it. And they've implemented no change,
So
any
that
controls. So it's just funny that they still only
Sorry, I don't
partially
mean
agree
to
with it.
interrupt
Oh,
you.
go ahead.
That 630 of 26. So are they still getting these funds? Wasn't some of this, like you said, PPE, COVID money, and things like that. They're still getting this, or is it a holdover? Like we're still going to be monitoring. It seems like if the grant is over, why would they monitor them?
Well, this is about their continuing the preschool promise program.
Okay.
That's all that they're getting at is saying, look,
Oh,
you need to, in this program, we still operate because, yeah, the PPP money's gone. That's all done. We're just talking about preschool promise right now.
okay.
Like that's what this letter is focused on saying, hey, for preschool promise, you need to implement better monitoring. And they're saying, sure, we'll do it by the end of this year. But this is something that again, it was a known issue 4 years ago. Why are you only partially agreeing to implement? I mean, it's just excuses, and that's just
And
I
but before you scroll on, it does say the reason for their partially agreeing to this was that they had to add staff capacity to strengthen the program. So you started a program and then you didn't have the staff. Is that because of COVID maybe?
No.
I
I mean,
no?
this is where there's no excuse. I mean, when the
Okay.
legislature appropriates the funding for their program, there's some set aside for like administrative costs for the agency to say, hey, we're going to run this grant program that the legislature's told us to run, and we're going to
Mhm.
use that money, and we're going to fund this many, grant slots out there, and we'll run this program, but we're going to need to keep X amount of dollars because we need to run this. So I'm going to need to hire. So they build out their staffing to, like, they have, this is where it gets way more complicated. I mean, operating in this world must be tough, but they should have had staff. They've taken the money to then run this program. I get, that's to me is one of the questions is, what did you do with all the staff who are supposed to monitor this? I where did that money go? What were they doing? You clearly weren't hiring people to monitor the program. So then what did you use those dollars that you kept in the agency for Preschool Promise? What did you do with it? Who
Yeah.
did you hire? Like, you certainly weren't monitoring this program, and it shouldn't have taken much. Again, with just the data that they I could get from them in my spare time, could find all these issues. What's holding them back? I mean, I'm just floored. To me, these are bogus answers,
Okay.
but I guess they're agreeing to make some changes. That's wonderful. Let me see if I can find one they said they did not agree. Forget which exact one. Yeah, work with the hubs. No, where was it? Another enforce a standardized reporting frequency with explicit due dates. Because they had issues with some providers weren't giving their answers in time or providing enrollment. But again, all these things are already baked into the grant agreements. They're just not holding people accountable. So to me, like when I see stuff like this, it's the issue is not that you didn't document the guidance or you didn't do, no, you as an agency didn't do your job,
Mhm.
but they're claiming that, well, we need to review and update our tools and like, yeah, these are issues you've known for years. You've just ignored them.
Now, didn't you also say that there was one provider that turned in the drawdown on the grant once a year? And so she operated the whole time?
Yes. Let's talk about that. So I'm glad I had the spreadsheet. Let me, oops, bear with me as I
Sure.
bring this up, and I'll make it bigger so you can see it on the screen here. Okay, so my favorite example, Village Childcare. Like I said, they did just about everything in a weird or wrong way that they could. So, like I said from the get-go, to get their money, right? So they're awarded X number of dollars for X number of slots for a year. They had to submit these essentially like expense reports. They'd submit them to the agency to say, hey, here's the expenses I incurred, and please pay me. And what was another anomaly with Village Childcare that I didn't see with other providers is, again, they were supposed to report quarterly. This was, again, in their grant agreements. It required them that you're supposed to report in every quarter your expenses and we pay you. But these are the date and time stamps of when Leslie Barnes at Village Childcare submitted all those draw reports, all done on the same day within 3 hours of each other. So she just took them all as a batch and sent them in. And that just seems, again,
Yeah.
weird to me because you're like, wait a minute, this was the year of COVID. I get it. There's a lot going on. But why weren't you asking for the money up, at the beginning of the year or in the fall, in the winter? Why did you wait until May? And why didn't Delk or then Early Learning Division, why weren't they checking in with you? Like,
Mhm.
hey, we've noticed that you have 33 slots. We've never heard from you and you've never asked for any money. There's only
Mm.
250 providers. That's not a lot. Like, that's not like there's thousands and thousands and they could have gotten lost in the mix. This program had one grant manager. This was the program that they ran. 250 providers is not a ton. You could easily see with the spreadsheet here who asked for money and who didn't. That was weird. But then she did it again the next year in July, again, all in a batch, all within, in this case, she got really efficient at it. And she was able to do all these grant reports in the span of 37 minutes
Wow.
for the year. And then again, she's getting even faster. For the 2022-23 school year, she did it in 14 minutes and
Is
submitted
it
all of her expenses
is
all
it
in the same
something
day.
that you have to fill out in there so that it's not like you can put it on an Excel sheet and just submit them all?
Right. No, it was online. I don't know the tool, but I know they had to go into this like enhanced grant management system, some
Okay.
online system to go and submit these. And there's a lot. Like if I scroll over, you can see um, like this is the total, but then these are all the categories they had to submit. What were my salaries? What were my benefits? Payroll taxes? Did I pay any accounting or professional services? Because there were a lot of expenses that were allowed for this grant to say, if you pay for advertising, we will reimburse you. If you pay for building maintenance, like there are certain costs that were allowed, and then a subset that were not allowed. Um, like mortgage payments, child screening assessments. If you had to buy equipment, like maybe you needed a copy machine to make printouts and handouts for kids, like for little exercises for kids. Um, but this is again where it starts getting weird of like very consistent whole numbers that were appearing in here, which just don't seem very real. And also to me, is how did you spend 3,600 a quarter when you had two kids? I mean, that's a lot of
Yeah.
money. And then, but the next year you had four kids, and the money went down. Like these just don't add up.
Uh-huh.
And so, and it could be that she incurred these costs for the other part of her business, the 16-person childcare facility, but that wasn't preschool promise. You can't mix the expenses. So there is a lot in here. I mean, telephone and internet, $1,400? Really? For your,
Mhm.
what was that? And then that expense went away for the most part the next year. So there's just some real head scratching stuff in here of like, this is what they reported to the early learning division to get their money back. So why wasn't anyone looking at this and saying, hey, why are you submitting them all at once? What's 1,400? What did you do? How could you
Well,
spend $1,400 on telephone and internet?
and that kind of begs the question, right? Like, if you've never maybe had this grant before, maybe you are familiar with other types, but maybe you've never had this one. You submit the first time and somebody looks at it and says, you know what, that's not a qualified expense. There's communication somewhere, and you didn't get
Yep.
that in your public records request. You can't tell me that every single person got it 100% right.
Yeah. I mean, it's
Strange.
and there's no checking against these, by the way. So that was the other part is they didn't. It's again self-attestation, right? So they're just reporting the numbers. They don't have to give them receipts for anything, and that would be overwhelming. I'm not saying that we should make this so burdensome that no one would ever want to be part of this program,
Right.
but if we're not checking the numbers, and there's software out there that does fraud detection, I mean, and can look at this. I mean, I could kind of scan through them, but that's hard when you have so many organizations and especially all the other providers and other programs. But there are fraud detection applications that can be used to find anomalies and then help flag them for a human to look at. But I just pulled up another one, this Finch County, the one we looked at before. At least this person's reporting in a more you know timely way. I mean, they can still batch them up, but they were sending in monthlies, but doing them around the same day. But this is more somebody following the rules, at least in terms of
Mm.
the timing of submitting them. Although, these first three were batched together pretty close. But later on, yeah, they were getting more consistent with it, but it's still, there was just, yeah, just what they were claiming for the number of kids supported. There were some other anomalies too, but yeah.
So,
So
if we don't have fraud detection software, maybe we do, maybe we don't, I have no idea. But would that be one acceptable resolution to all of this mess? Is that the state implement that like a mandatory with all of their X programs, grant programs? That is that what we're after?
Um, that's a great question, and I'd say if they don't have that, they should. I mean, that should just be something in place, or there's somebody, like that's maybe the Secretary of State should be doing, is doing audits of random programs and running it through a process to look for potential, look for anomalies, right? Especially with the introduction of AI into every tool and every every
Mhm.
piece of our lives. Like there are tools now that are phenomenal. They're probably very expensive. They're very inexpensive, and we could start using. But I'd say the number one thing, where there's, I guess I come up with a lot of recommendations, but the first would be we got to stop with the self-attestation. There needs to be some level of proof. And one of the recommendations of the Secretary of State, which I totally agree with, is that we need better accounting of who are the kids in these programs, not just there were 6 kids. Who? I need names and some unique identifier so that we know one thing is that that kid is real, and that kid is also only in that program and not that same, like, little Johnny is not ending up in all of
3
your
other.
programs. Like you're not double, triple
Oh.
counting little Johnny and little Janie, or that they're not showing up in other schools. So we need something, and I'm not trying to be like big government overreach. It's just for basic accountability. Say, how do we know, this is a real human, and that real human is not being reused in multiple places. And they do have the data. They do have to keep logs of the kids. Like this is part of what those in-person audits will check, is they'll look for, they'll look at your attendance logs and look to make sure that every kid is accounted for. So they have the names, they're stored, they're there. It's just we're not collecting them. We should be. I mean, that just this is just basic stuff. The other, aside from this, if I put it out there, is as much as I love that we publish our all the agency expenditures, like I can just go out there and get this multi-year expenditure file, and it has like I said, 2019, it was just refreshed. It's refreshed every December, so it has now everything through 2025 fiscal year. That needs to include some, like it would be great to have the tax ID number or some designation so I can pull out like nonprofit. Like we need some additional level of detail so that it'll be easier to see and tease out where this money is going to, what type of industry is getting it, the programs. There's just some improvement that could be made there, so it wouldn't require all these individual records requests across all these different agencies to find out, like, are we really propping up one particular industry? Are we getting the bang for our buck? That's the other part, is the reporting, like the
Yeah.
oversight of the money spent, of like what value did we get back as a community? What was delivered and from this money? That's often hard to find.
And that's a really good point too. One of the things I've been looking at is ODOT, and you can go on their projects list. You could click on a map, and it will bring up the project and when it started and how much it's supposed to cost and where they are in the project. What it doesn't tell you is what type of funding is used for this project, because what it makes it look like on the outside is Oregon is spending all of this money, but we're actually getting a lot of federal dollars too. So I would like to know if federal dollars are building the thing that we don't need, or is it state money? So I think they could be better in their reporting all the way around. It's good that it's there, but it should be better.
Yeah, I know one of the questions I'd have for anyone running for office at this point is, you know, let's say our new governor, like, what is your plan to address the fraud and the waste? What could you do? And there's a lot they can do, right? They can't pass bills. We'll need the legislature to do their work too, but there's a lot they can do. And even if I was talking to a legislator, like, what are you going to do to specifically? I don't want the big picture. Although, well, I
Mhm.
do want to hear that there's a big picture plan, but I want to know, then you get elected first week. What are you doing? What are you going to call for? What are you going to put out as an executive order, right, to improve the transparency, the accountability? Like accountability shouldn't be a bad word. People treat it
Uh,
like it's a bad word, but no, it's a good word, because if we're holding each other accountable and we're being public about it, then we don't have to battle. It's just we can rely on somebody to do their job, and hey, we'll make mistakes, but we just acknowledge it and do better. Great. But when we hide everything or make it hard to get at or just refuse to investigate, it just invites more divisiveness, more threats, more arguments, more finger pointing, and zero
More
progress
conspiracy theories.
or real conspiracies.
Or real conspiracies,
But yes,
absolutely.
you're right. The void always gets filled by something, and I'd rather it be filled by truth and facts and data than us trying to guess as to what's really happening.
And that's the big thing for me this year is seeing through some of the high level politician talk. I'm not going to say what particular person, but there is somebody out there that is very Trump 2.0 talk. And I really don't care about, you know, those. That's entertaining. I don't want to be entertained anymore. I'm done being entertained. I want to know, like, what are you going to do? What is the policy? And if we're not talking policy, then like I don't have time for that. And I think we're all fatigued over it. You know, we're
Yeah.
done. We want to know where our money is going because it looks like you haven't been working for us, and it doesn't matter, you know, who or what. There's so much chaos out there that it is going to take people like you that have done some really amazing work to sift through some of this chaos and tell us this is how we're going to make it better. I'm sorry that that thing happened. I'm sorry that, you know, validate us and also validate the people that lost their businesses during COVID, the people
Mm-hmm.
that suffered during COVID who lost their MIMAs. We have not been seen with that. And if people aren't going to go back and talk about how are you going to actually bring in mom and pop shops, not all of the big tech in the Silicon Forest and all of those things,
Mm-hmm.
um, tell us how the mom and pop shops in our communities are going to be better and what is your policy. That is going to be my number one thing, talking to people. And I invite people to come on and talk to me. I don't care if you're a Democrat, I don't care if you're a Republican or independent, I don't care what you are, because I want to meet people and see where people are on policy. I'm so fatigued over the um, drama. You know,
Yeah.
I think we've had enough of that. And um, so you're just really hoping to wait for a transition maybe next year. Hopefully in the meantime people will start picking up. There might be some criminal charges that have been put out there, maybe filed with the attorney general. Do you plan to do that?
Yeah, I'd say my work is ongoing. I
Okay.
have like there's too many. I always have too many things on my plate, and then I also try to be a good dad, a good husband, and a good worker because I have a day job I have to do.
Yeah.
But I'm not done chasing this. Like I've been very persistent over 3 years trying to get this dealt with, and I think we're starting to see movement, and I'm happy with that. But that like I was talking to some friends the other day saying that this year, and they don't know all of what I get into, so because I don't need to just share with everybody all this crazy stuff, but I just said one of my personal goals for this year is for somebody to get into prison or somebody to end up in prison from what I've seen and what I've been reporting on. And not that I have any like want to wish harm on somebody. I will only want somebody to be in prison who deserves to be. But it's just sort of that point of this is bad. This is really bad. We've only touched
Yeah.
on parts of it, and until there's some accountability, even at that level, then this will continue. And so that's part of the reason you have consequences is to help people not make bad choices. But when we've existed in this vacuum of no consequences and just money flowing everywhere, we've just seen more and more and more problems. But I think people will wise up if they find out that, oh, if I do these wrong things, I might end up in prison myself, then, or I have to pay it back or some kind of consequence. I think that'll slow it down, hopefully stop it. So yeah, I'm hoping for some real consequences this year, but for a productive cause, right?
Right.
To end this crazy stuff so that we can. I mean, we hadn't talked about this yet, but I just want to make sure I put this out there. this should matter to everybody, because this money, I mean, if you really think about it, this money was meant to help our families who are most in need help their children. And so that's what gets to me, is you got little kids out there who we're supposed to be serving. And, when we ask for this money, or the legislators ask for this money, or people ask, like, tugs on your heartstrings. Like, you want these families
Yeah.
to be successful and have their kids and get a good education and a good start to their life, and to see that the money's being taken by people and it's not helping kids. This is money that, if we didn't need to spend it here, we could have easily found other places to spend it to help these families, or to help others, or help all kids. It's gone now, but we can make it better going forward. But it just, like, no one should be okay with this, of money being tabbed for this purpose and then just are watching it get robbed.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm being very blunt,
absolutely.
but
No, absolutely. That it is on some of the most vulnerable of our population, and these are the
mhm.
children that we're raising up to replace us at some point in the future, and that is terrible. I also hope that if you were called to be, part of Oregon Doge, that you would maybe consider it.
Well, I haven't been haven't reached out to them. I haven't been asked to be part of, but hey, I'm willing to work with anybody, just to get this information out there and to get it addressed. That's what I care about. There's no personal vendetta. I know I call out village childcare a lot. They're just a great example of all these different issues. I don't know these people personally. They're just names on a spreadsheet to
Hmm.
me. But yeah, whatever it takes, whoever's, I'm happy to always talk and share what I've seen, and
Well, I
hopefully we get this
appreciate
dealt with.
that. And I appreciate all the digging you've done to be able to enlighten the rest of us. It very likely is happening everywhere. And that's terrible too. So thank you so much for. Is there anything else before we sort of wind down the information that you want people to know that maybe we didn't cover?
Well, that's a good one. We covered a lot. No, yeah, I was trying to think. That's a good one. I guess, don't be afraid to ask questions, and I think you touched on this earlier, is don't always assume the worst. I know I can go there. It's a very human thing to think, like, these governments are always trying to take all of our money. Like, I know people who work in at the state level, at federal level. I mean, local, and schools and teachers. Like, I'd be lying if I said I didn't have those moments where I'm like, they're all crooked. But no, they're not. Most are great. Most are your
Yeah.
neighbors. They're people we know, and it's just, so maybe just pull back on the emotions, or thinking they're all bad. Just assume the best. But that doesn't mean that there's not bad apples. There are always, but they're in private business. They're elsewhere too. I mean, all private businesses have fraud and waste, and it's like, not like anyone's perfect. It's not like government's the only place where there's trouble. There's trouble everywhere, because humans are innately broken. We are imperfect creatures, so we're going to create imperfect systems and imperfect organizations and imperfect grant programs. But
Well, and this is sort of
yeah,
full circle too. Isn't the whole reason that you kind of got involved with this was because somebody was trying to whistle blow and they had gotten burned, and then you kind of took the helm?
yeah, I think it's, in general, whistleblowing, like the real whistleblower, like somebody internal, like, it just never works out for the whistleblower. You don't
Yeah.
hear a lot of heroic stories of, like, this person's, maybe in the news, or maybe sometime you hear a story, but the vast majority do not seem to work out. So I think there's just this fear of really speaking out or saying anything. And but as we've seen, like, one anonymous tip can lead to some really interesting discoveries. So I guess yeah, I mean, and that's partly what motivated me, was knowing that there was just, this is legit, and it's, now I have to figure out how to prove it and show it to others. But if anyone's, I guess I put a call out too, if anyone's witnessing this stuff and you're worried about blowing the whistle or saying something, I don't go to the ethics commission. That's a waste. And frankly, the ethics commission, there is no anonymity. Like, that is it. There
No.
isn't. your name and like my information's out there, public record, like home
Yeah.
address. It's really scary that they have no protection for somebody
Nope.
reporting issues there. So I would not recommend going to the ethics commission for anything. But fraud, waste, and abuse, you can be anonymous. There are other ways to do it, but you can also find people, like if it's education related, hey, hit me up. I'm always looking for info. I may not be able to run with everything that I hear, but I'm willing to talk and see if there's some ways I can help. But there are other people out there, like you mentioned, Oregon Doge. There's a lot of people trying to help, and sign up with a burner email account and share something. And there are other ways to get the news out there that don't put you in a tough position, because I don't want anyone to like get burned from just trying to do the right thing. Like that,
And where
that's
can
sad.
people find you to get a hold of you if they wanted?
So if you're on X, my handle is at Papa Bear Myers. You can go to saveoregonschools.com, which is a Substack that I don't post some things there here and there. It kind of depending on time and if I have the time to write up a story. On Facebook, it's at Save Oregon Schools. So I think if you just search social media for Save Oregon Schools or Papa Bear Myers or Jeff Myers, there you can find me. Yeah, and I do respond, maybe not always within hours, but if you got something, you can hit me up one of those platforms. I take direct messages there. Um, Happy to communicate. And like when you reached out, like we hopped on the phone
Yeah.
and then we chatted. So, I'm always willing to chat with folks and see how I can help.
And I'll just mention as well, your Substack has the data already, not as extensive as it probably on your spreadsheet, but you did list the people that received the grants and the child slots and things like that. So if people are interested, what's the Substack again?
Oh, saveoregonschools.com.
Okay.
It's one of the older stories, like back in 2022. But yeah, I did publish and even made a little dashboard that you could pull up and look up providers, and you could see the different amounts of money they got. I I always think maybe I'll refresh the data at some point with more, but it just it took a fair amount of time just to get that out there. But at least it has a lot of this data from those
Yeah.
first two school years. I mean, and it's still the same data.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, thank you so much for your work, your dedication to truth, your dedication to the little people. Um, and if nothing else, it's been great to meet you and talk to you. And now, maybe we'll get together on some other, NGO stuff. So,
Oh yeah, anytime. Happy to talk with you. Thank you, Kay. I appreciate you having me here, and hope if anyone lasted the whole hour and 40. Hey, congrats to you. It's a long time to be listening in. I hope it was
yes.
useful.
Yes, thank you. And also, if you want to email me any tips, anything that you want covered, it's the spotlight tips with a Z at gmail.com. Um, Thank you, everyone, for listening, and good night. It's been the spotlight.